Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Looks Like We Made It. I'm Issy Howell and I'm joined by Managing Director of Howell Film, Chris, to talk all things video marketing. We are the father and daughter who run the video production company Howell Film, and each week we will be discussing all sorts like what happens behind the scenes on our projects, getting results from your video content, how to start using video in your business, and plenty more to come. We're always up for candidly conversing about creativity. On this episode, we are talking all things Automaton with lead filmmaker Andy Roughan. So without further ado, let's get started, and of course never miss an episode every Tuesday by giving us a follow or subscribe, as well as finding Howell Film on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. Let's go!
Let's go.
All
Let's
things Automaton.
all things Automaton.
What does that mean?
Exactly. Well, this is the opening pop because there's a reason that I think automatons are really interesting to work with as valuable artifacts in history, because it's not quite an antique, as in like it's not quite just sat static. It's not quite a completely movable object. But it's also something which is symbolically really important to the actual museum that it's part of. So there's an entire section when we were filming where I was actually thinking about this, which got me fascinated.
Do you want to set the scene
Yeah.
before we jump in with
So,
is this any specific automaton or just automaton in general?
This is a very specific automaton. This is the Silver Swan at the Bose Museum. So I guess people probably... You might not have come across the term automaton during your day-to-day. So an automaton basically is a kind of robot fashioned out of clockwork that were extremely popular in the kind of 1800s.
We apologise to any orological historians in the room.
With my knowledge. But basically the real kind of amazing thing about working with things like automatons and how they are, like how filming them or how putting them on cameras is it becomes a point of debate, I guess, on the setups of it. So I remember and I don't know if you guys remember this, when we were doing the initial setup, the first time, because we've worked with it twice now, the first approach, because it's been done by other people obviously, I'll try and be concise here.
Yeah,
so,
go on.
So I'll lay the scene down.
Under 25 hours.
Under 25 hours. So this thing has been filmed hundreds of times. Yes. Okay, I have to lay that out there. The Silver Swan is very, very famous. It's an important artifact in the local area. The BBC have been there. I've no doubt ITV have been there. There are literally, in the history of it, hundreds of people who have filmed it. So... how do you film it so it doesn't look the same every single time? So that is what I wanted to talk about.
Well, that's good, because the whole point. So the Bose project that we were doing, we've worked with the Bose Museum for a few times now. That project that we're going to be talking about with Andy is essentially the situation with the Silver Swan as an artifact in the museum. Is that if you don't know, it gets wound up, or it did get wound up once or twice a day, and it would perform, music would play, and it would do like a little dance, and then it would stop. And that is absolutely incredible to see. If it's from like the 1790s or something. It's absolutely incredible how old it is. None of us really know, do we?
200. It was approaching 250 because basically John Joseph Merlin and James Cox were the guys.
I'm struggling here. I think we've got a dangerous amount of knowledge in this room about this.
Yeah. Well, you pick it up.
You do think.
What I was going to say was,
I think it's just under 250 years old.
So it's a very, very old artifact that still moves beautifully like it is a swan today. But the difficulty is that every time it does move and perform for an audience, it wears down a little bit, and it's a mechanical object. And as they say, it's a bit like maintaining a car. If you use something and you use it regularly, it's going to wear down. So what we were commissioned to do was essentially capture the process of Matthew Reed, who was a clockmaker conservator who was in charge of maintaining this automaton, we were there to capture that process of it being maintained and capture further down the line a discussion about whether it should be run again or if it should be run or put into a box and never played again. So our role was, while it was under conservation, was to capture it being conserved as well as capturing it performing properly so that people who couldn't see it performing until it's restored, and potentially until that conversation is over, could actually watch it perform on film. So we were challenged with essentially putting a 250-year-old artifact under really elaborate lighting, a very kind of neutral background, and showing its performance in such a way that it captivates an audience just as much as seeing it happen in real life. And that was a challenge.
It was a challenge.
And before you jump in about just how challenging it was, I would like to throw my two pence in here, which is, I think it's absolutely brilliant that you as our lead filmmaker and your team are so stoked by this project. It's amazing that you want to come onto the podcast and talk about a project that you've been involved with that has captured your imagination. You are a Swan fanboy, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. I really do.
It's his username on all orological.
Honestly, I think it's brilliant. I think that the fact that we haven't just gone along, done a job, left, and moved on to the next job. This is it's really
Captivated.
It's captivated and piqued your interest, hasn't it? You are into it. So go on.
So
talk about it.
Well, I mean, really, where do we begin? The first thing was we obviously you're given a whole bunch of reference videos. So from we're just going to approach this at first creatively. So I'm sat there. We know what we're filming. I've seen the reference videos. They've been sent through, and the first thing we're told is, please don't do it like that. So you're sat there, you've seen the videos, and you know you can't do it like that. So it becomes creatively, you have to like look at it in a completely different way. So I think originally it was, the go-to is, let's turn all the lights out. Let's, keep it quite dark, keep it quite mystical, magical. But, and rightly so, they were kind of like, it's been done to death. It's everybody films the Swan in the same way. So I remember that was one of the big things as we were like, right, creatively this is going to be a challenge. So we set about coming up with new ideas and new ways to film the performance. Now I'm only talking the magnificent performance that we got at the end there, which was, where it swings its head. If people haven't seen the film, it is available on Facebook, on Buzz Museum Facebook.
Or you can go to the museum and watch it on the big screen.
Which is the way you should do.
It's always be watched on the big screen.
And the sound system's great in there as well, which you can hear it like echoing through the museum, which I was really proud of. Anyway, so that was the first thing. And I remember we started talking about like colour palettes and stuff to put on the backdrop. Because, second challenge, it's reflective. It's a silver swan, so it will reflect light. So how do you look at something like that and think, if I put too much light on that, it's just going to bounce that back in, it's going to be overexposed, all that kind of stuff. So those initial challenges was starting to be like, okay, this is going to be quite difficult. And then you've got, we can play it maybe 4 or 5 times in
your lifetime.
so there's no do-over.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a light, a reflective object that can only be played 5 times, and I'm not allowed to shoot it in any way that I've seen.
And each performance is 31 seconds long.
So I remember, I mean, you can't ask for better challenges when you're approaching that, but. And I think the final output is amazing, by the way. I was so proud of the entire team for backing, the way that we worked on that. So how did we do it? Well, it became kind of clear through that we would need a little bit of time before setups. And I remember we basically so how do we do it? We used a nice, I think it was like a bluey grey.
It was like a grey backdrop.
I thought it was quite interesting as well that we didn't opt to do a green screen behind it. That actually went for something more with a depth, with like a real solid. It was like it was like a kind of bluey grey kind of really nice.
There was us online looking for silver or grey backgrounds that would fit a 250-year-old automaton swan. It's not searches that you normally find online.
No,
but
I think it was all about control, though. The whole project was about control. As Andy said, it's about controlling the environment as much as we can. And I think that by closing it down with our own, if you put your own background on there, you've got your own lighting in there. And I know the environment was tricky because it's a great big gallery space we were working in,
and roof lights
with roof lights as well.
So
I think that the challenge for you, that kind of like the professional challenge of, as you just mentioned, you can only play the thing 2 or 3 times, and it, you don't have that. Let's go again. So we've got to, get it nailed to start with, which gets us back to a previous podcast we've done about planning, about the fact that, we knew what we wanted to achieve. We had the technical expertise to build that solution, and we were able to go along. And I mean, it wasn't easy, but we were able to go along with at least a good head start in terms of how we were going to achieve it.
We had to. I think the thing as well is going back to pre-production as well, and working, the realities of working in that environment is something that we never or hadn't experienced much of before, which is working with, I'm sure lots of other film companies have the same, is working incredibly closely with priceless artifacts, like things that have so valuable both financially, historically, socially, like things that literally, it's like working with something that you're a part of its history at that point, and you have to make technical considerations which you don't want loads of lights or things that are unsecure over the top of it. You don't want the fear of like tripping and knocking something over. We had to basically glide around that set like we were ballerinas, because you couldn't be too heavy-handed, so you had to execute all of these technical elements working with something that was so delicate that you had to be very, very, very careful.
So originally, I mean, if we were in a dream scenario, what you would want to do is you'd want to put lights directly over the top and just kind of like floodlight it, and not have directional lighting, because we're working with a backdrop, and if you get shadows on the backdrop, you have to remove them in post, which there was an element of that now and again, because you're working with the constraints that you have. But there is simply no way in a million years that we could have rigged any lights over the top of it. But it was, what we did to kind of counteract all that was really, what I kind of admire about the approach was, we were working with an antique and we were using some old school methods like light meters to film it. So there was this real kind of like meeting of old school, which really kind of married together on the project really well.
I think you're right. I think it was it was a world of skills colliding right the way back from the 250-year-old Swan, which, gosh, that's just like genius in terms of the design and the manufacture of that. We've got Matthew and his team, incredible skill there. We've got us and our team, incredible skill there. But they're all, as you say, they are old school techniques. Yeah. It wasn't turn up with an app, point it in the room and go, oh, well, that'll sort it out. There was proper grown up, maths. We were actually doing maths.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that
hence
was
why I went quiet at that point.
But it was in essence what I really, really enjoyed about it, and what puts me in that Swan boy, just Swan boy. That is my username online, by the way, if anyone's interested. Swan fanboy category is.
Here's a question: Are you into any other automaton?
I can take or leave the peacock in St. Petersburg. But no, the Swan fanboy element of that is because you're dealing with something which captured the imagination of generations before filmmaking was a thing. So you're looking at something which was the blockbuster of the time, which people would focus their evenings around to go and see. And and it's got this incredible storied history of being like in the workshop and then being seen in Paris. it was sold off to pay off like James Cox's debts and stuff. Like it's so well journaled, and the fact that thinking about it, the guy who made it in 1780 or 1790 or whenever it was around that time, the idea that they were just 1773. There you go. So it's that whole thing of them basically making it at the time, and they were one of 100 pieces. Like he was making these for kings and emperors in China and stuff, and he was making all these incredible things. And here we have one of the last ones to ever exist sat right in front of us, which is so historically incredible. That it is just a privilege to even be able to go that close to it.
I think that because the thing that as someone who's a history nerd is that when it would really put things into perspective when Matthew would be saying stuff like, oh, they use this type of screw into it because normal modern day nuts and bolts hadn't been invented yet, and I was like, oh my god. Mm-hmm. But it's also things like that swan is just about as old as modern America, and it's just, and Marie Antoinette was still alive and kicking with her head on her while that was around. So it really puts it into perspective. But it's things like the thing that I find particularly interesting, I suppose, is that the films that we've produced for the museum and for the Swan is essentially integrally a part of its history now. The Swan itself as an artifact is going to carry on, hopefully, for the next few centuries, and it'll be around for... It'll be even more astounding when it's 600 years old, but it will... The historical process of archiving and protecting its past, I suppose, is what this film has become, and this discussion has become that. So we've essentially become a part of this artifact's history. So how does that as a filmmaker make you feel, knowing that you've produced something that is essentially part of an artifact's infinite history?
This is kind of what I was talking about really earlier, is the fact that you conceptually, your approach is always going to be tainted by the past that's already had, which is why when we're talking about these films that we've been shown, and saying, that's how it's been done all the time and stuff like that. But then we come along and we try and put our own imprint on it the same way that, with the Conservation Week, they all have their own ideas to how they do it, but we approach it in a different fashion. So they're talking about the swan itself, we're talking about how do we picture the swan in a visual element. So from a conservation, in a weird way, what we are doing is it's not just, we're incredibly lucky and all that kind of stuff to be just involved with the swan in any capacity, but actually what makes me a swan fanboy, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is that my impression or my ideas of how the swan should be captured will forever be cemented in its own history, and there's no two ways. That's not, it's not like a debate thing. It's because we were brought in to do that. So intrinsically, which just constantly, I'll have a little thought about it, blows my mind. Howell Film in that capacity will always have captured the swan's moment of its life at that particular point through our own eyes.
Hello, this is Izzy from the future. As I'm editing this podcast, we've decided to split this episode because it's so long and we couldn't stop talking about swans. We've decided to split this into a two-parter, so I'm going to end this one today. And if you did like this episode, stick around to hear the other part next week. And if you are listening on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, please give us a rate or review. And you can listen to this podcast on www.howellfilm.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts. If you've got a question or you want to be on the show, just let us know. And yeah, stick around for next week because it's going to be really, really good, and you'll see the conclusion of Swan Boy's story. So, bye!